thank the member, Mr. de Souza, for responding to my speech. I think Mr. de Souza is making a straw man argument. He's implying that the WP does not think our president and ministers should sit on international boards. This is not what I said. What I did say is, I accept that the president may sometimes take up roles in international organizations in his official capacity in order to advance Singapore's international standing and advance our national interests. We have no issue with him taking up these roles in his official capacity. What we disagree with him is taking up these roles in his private capacity. I think Mr. de Souza has not addressed that in his speech. In fact, the DPM already clarified that these international organizations are happy to have our president and ministers in their official capacity, so I don't see what the issue is.
Mr. Chris de Souza.
I'm afraid the member is incorrect on two counts. The first is that the private bodies see the elevation of Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam as the President of Head of State to be an advantage to their organizations. But it did not, as I understood it, they did not want him to be just stating what the government's position on things would be. They wanted his personal view. And this was never contemplated in the Constitution, because the Constitution always had official capacity. And so Cabinet looked at this and said, look, they were upfront about it. You know, they didn't sneak it under the carpet and say, just, bygones be bygones, just carry on with official capacity and let the president say what he wants to say in private capacity. No, that would be wrong, even if nobody found out. The Attorney General said, look, based on the tools, the framework, the mechanics of the Constitution, this may run into a little bit of trouble. So why don't we allow memberships via private capacities, but fetter them? Fetter them by Cabinet. And that is why we have Article 22C. So it was out of an abundance of caution that we are doing what we are doing today. That puts it in perspective.
Mr. Gerald Giam.
So Mr. de Souza himself said in his speech that Mr. Tharman has a mind of his own. I just paraphrase him. He said, but Mr. Tharman has been on these boards in his official capacity all this time. DPM Wong has confirmed that all these positions that he's currently on are in his official capacity. And he's been speaking his mind all this time. So what is wrong with that?
Mr. Chris de Souza.
Well, Mr. Tharman is now the head of state. And therefore, we have to have structure, predictability, a framework in order to resolve what could be internationally prickly situations. And if you look at the explanatory statement, it states very clearly under Article 22C what the Cabinet can advise the President to do. 3 conditions must be met before the President may do so. First, the President must be disabled by Article 19A1 from performing the function of the office. Second, the Cabinet must advise the President that it is in the national interest for the President to accept and hold the office. Third, the President, acting in his discretion, must concur with the Cabinet's advice. In deciding whether to give his concurrence, the President is not subject to a time limit. And the President must relinquish the office if so advised by the Cabinet. So, Mr. Tharman has now been elevated to head of state, and this provides, I think, both His Excellency and the regulators in the form of the Cabinet to have a very predictable framework to deal with these issues. And let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. No, there are issues that are facing the globe, which our ministers and also the President have unique, deep insights to contribute towards. So do we put a roadblock? Or do we find a workable solution. And in the Singapore way, we find a workable solution.
Associate Professor Jamus.
Thank you, Speaker. Let me start by clarifying that my citation of Articles 9 on due process as well as Article 11 on retroactivity was to say that I actually did not believe, and I quote myself, that there was any incoherence between the bill itself and the Constitution. So let me first put that on the record. Now, but if I heard Mr. de Souza correctly, he suggests that one impetus for this bill is that it was to accommodate potentially the concerns of these international organizations about the independence of our potential representatives were we to send them to there. But perhaps I should ask the question, what does it say about us as a nation, as a sovereign nation, if we are amending the highest law of the land just so that we can potentially appease the desires of international organizations?
Mr. de Souza.
If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So when you get invited to these organizations, they speak well of Singapore, they speak well of the person whom has been invited. The door is ajar. Singapore's interests can be presented by way of osmosis and the whole ecosystem. In the boardroom or the committee room, you get a sense of each continent's difficulties, political difficulties, economic difficulties. So why say no? We're not pandering to the requests of international organizations. The fact that people who I've mentioned, Ms. Lee Kuan Yew, SMTO, other esteemed cabinet ministers, SM Tharman, are continued to be sought after years in government speaks well that they're relevant. But they want not just the official line. If there is room to share from their own experience and their own wealth of knowledge, from what they've been through, how they think can pan out, not just for Singapore, but for the world and for the region. Why veto that? Why shut that out? How can that be construed as us pandering to international organizations when it is a feather in the cap to actually be invited in the first place, and then set down rules as to what can or cannot be done, so that the international organizations know the rules of engagement, and so do we, both on His Excellency's head of state side and on cabinet side. So I turn it on its head and say, we're not pandering. We should be honored and humbled and accept as far as possible, subject to national interest.